It seems to me that it's now a time to have a serious discussion as to whether the guidelines that now are in place at the Energy Department for approving export applications are what they need to be. A recent study commissioned by the Department of Energy to examine the impact of natural gas exports, in my view, raised more questions than it answered.
But I do want to follow up as we talk about public interest. I find it an interesting conversation that that there is some surprise about talking about the need to not only export a new natural resource we have now that is an incredible opportunity, but also weighing how we leverage that, keep it at a reasonable cost basis in order to create American jobs. It seems to me that's what our job is to find that balance to be able to do that. And when we look at what the DOE is looking at right now in terms of their studies and so on, I would follow up. Mr. Livers, you talked about the 100 new projects that have been announced at a value of over $95 billion, and that if we keep natural gas affordable, we're looking at 5 million manufacturing jobs, and that's certainly something, seems to me, would be of significant importance in this economy as we're trying to turn around, and manufacturing has really been inching along, leading the way. But when we look at the study that the Department of Energy has used, to your knowledge, did it include the 100 new projects? And if not, how would that affect the reliability of that study?
Yeah, so we thank you, Senator Stabenow. The study did not include the $96 billion of projects that are now on the books. It actually used the EIA demand scenario as of 2010, 2011. These projects were not on the books in states like Senator Landrieu's state. By the way, happy Mardi Gras, Senator Landrieu. We definitely feel that this study should be re-examined. It's not just us that said it's flawed. Many people have looked at it and said, this is a part that needs to be upgraded. By the way, I think we should do 2 or 3 or 4 more studies and get everything on the table. I think that's the whole discussion we're having here. Because one study does not make a strategy. Okay? One study does not make the decision. I think we have lots of inputs to the decision, not the least of them being making sure we have responsible supply.
Well, would you discuss a little bit more what you think is missing from the DOE approach at this point? What more would you like to see considered in the broad consideration of what we should be exporting and the approvals of the export terminals?
I think it's trying to describe almost the unforecastable. Just like we were here 5 to 7 years ago. Last time, I've only ever testified once before. It was on the issue of natural gas, and I was actually trying to help the oil and gas industry get more drilling rights offshore and get more drilling rights to actually produce more. So I understand what restricted supply does to markets, but I cannot forecast energy demand. No one can, because it's geopolitical. So what we have to do is, in the process, look at responsible exports over time that allows the win-win-win I talked about. Job creation in the oil and gas sector and the exploration side. Job creation downstream and not hurting the American consumer with the unintended consequence of bringing the oil price back to the domestic consumer's electricity bills. And I think there's lots of factors that can be put into place in there, and you've mentioned some of them. We can go into it, and we have views on it, but I think that's what we should study in fulsome detail. Meantime, let's allow exports to our FTA partners.
Let me start, if I might, with Mr. Eisenberg and Mr. Livers from NAM and from Dow, just regarding potential approaches for how to balance the factors you've spoken to, the competing economic, environmental, national security interests. You note that policymakers should, aspirationally, rely on the best quality information, on objective criteria, on metrics that allow making the best decision in a public policy process. And given the inherently limited nature of projections and of modeling, particularly for world market conditions, particularly in energy, what type of systems do you suggest might be put in place to evaluate ongoing and potential impacts, intended and unintended, even while the DOE and FERC licensing processes are underway? And in your view, if we phase in licensing for export of natural gas, what would be the most prudent timing in which you would phase that in?
Well, thank you. I I do think, and as you note in our testimony, we do call for the best quality information in this process. And I think it's important, and this is a question that Senator Wyden raised in his comments on the DOE study, which are that they used the 2011 Annual Energy Outlook statistics. And, we absolutely agree that that should be updated. But at the same time, that can be updated while the permitting process is ongoing. Right now, we are building none, right? We are permitting none. We have a complete moratorium. So let's get it on with it. Let's start moving and continue to have the best quality information for those fact-specific determinations that DOE must make as they go through this licensing process. There is, as Mr. Liveris said, there are 2 studies that DOE has done on this matter. I read them over the weekend. There are no shortage of studies out there that Deloitte and IHS and everybody else are doing on this issue, and I appreciate and I'm happy with the continuing dedication to understanding the impact of this. But that's not a reason not to let the free market work. Our policy says that we fundamentally believe in free trade and open markets, and we do. We view it with respect to this and just about any other commodity. And so we think we can have it all here, and we do think we should strive to have the best quality information, but it shouldn't be a reason to continue with the moratorium.
Thank you.
Senator Coons, I'm all for studies and consultants. I'm all for academia, but they don't buy gas. I buy, as Dow, more gas than most countries. Okay, so we are a significant purchaser of this risk. And therefore, when you fool with this risk by not having the public interest in mind in its totality, you have to get your criteria right by looking at all the angles. And all the angles did not get looked at 10 years ago. When we deregulated power in the 90s, in the Clinton era, it had an unintended consequence to a domestic sector. We had gas prices spiking as high as $15 and $18 and $20 per million BTU. Manufacturing was fleeing the country. Factories were being announced around the world. It wasn't labor offshoring, it was energy offshoring. Energy is the lifeblood of an economy in all of its forms. In its value-add form, the one that Senator Stabenow asked me about, the consumer and the home heating bill of the consumer. It's in all of its forms. So be careful of 1 or 2 or 3 studies giving you the absolute criteria. As you said in your comments, and Chairman Wyden made comment as well, no one gets this right. We're in the 4th or 5th year of trying to understand what this bounty is. Can we produce it responsibly across the country? There are regions that differ already, we know that. The geology is different. We don't know how much supply we have. Let's be careful testing our country on when a market gets to maturity on liquidity risk. Why should we take the liquidity risk as a country in a totality while someone overseas benefits from our bounty? Be measured in the criteria. Let's crawl, walk, run through these applications. Exports should be allowed. They should be allowed to our FTA partners. That's the public interest. Develop the criteria as we go along. Figure out what the unintended consequences are. I want to clarify, I say it over and over, there is no such thing as free trade. It's rules-based free trade. There is no GATT. There is no Doha. Why? Countries don't agree on the rules. What rules are we agreeing to here when we decide to approve 12 applications overnight? Be careful that we look at this treasure and set the rules with America's interests in mind. That's all.